Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Dev Diary. In November of this year, Yo-Yo Games, the team behind GameMaker, announced a major change to the way that people could use their engine. They'd remove the subscription model, which was introduced a couple of years ago, make the program completely free to use/publish for non-commercial usage, and also reinstate a one-time fee for commercial usage for everything but consoles. And this change was huge for people like myself, because it meant that I was finally able to do something that I've wanted to do for almost as long as I've been using GameMaker. But before we get too far into things, remember to leave a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Also make sure notifications are turned on so you don't miss future videos. Now, as a former Flash developer, the concept of the browser game was something that I've wanted to somehow return to, and GameMaker was a viable alternative going back at least as far as GameMaker 8. Now, GameMaker Studio introduced modules which included browser support, but I could never afford it. And by the time I could, GameMaker Studio 2 released, and the stars just never realigned. But with the change in November, I was finally able to do it. I was finally able to make another browser game. So to get a feel for how GameMaker worked in HTML5, I made a simple prototype called Gunhair. It's a bullet heaven-like game with a dude on a hoverboard shooting some dinosaurs. So our player isn't anything too crazy, simple top-down movement and a timer that automatically fires a bullet. Speaking of timers, there's also a timer for dino spawns. In both the player attack and dino spawn timers slowly increase after so many dinos are defeated. The player automatically aims for the nearest dino to its position, and the dinos simply continuously move towards the player's position. Again, nothing fancy or too different from a lot of the other projects that we've been working on recently, because the point of today's project was to get familiar with HTML5. And part of that familiarity process was throwing a bunch of GameMaker's features at this thing to see what would happen. For example, surfaces. As each dino is defeated, it leaves behind a corpse sprite which is saved to a surface. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't possible to test some of the usual quirks because everything seemed to be tied to the static canvas size, which I'm sure can be manipulated somehow. Also included was an outline layer effect, aka shaders, and they seemed to work for the most part. The only inconsistency seemed to be with interpolation, which would occasionally cause the outline to act weird. But overall, it seemed that the majority of the things that I tested, such as my personal depth system, tiles, and general visual shenanigans, all work one-to-one. Even object pooling seemed to work flawlessly, and it's fascinating to witness this firsthand after basically dreaming about this potential for so long. I am honestly curious to learn more to figure out, where the limits lie in HTML5 and maybe even mobile gaming now that the options are actually available. And while we are being honest, I remember thinking how awesome that this new GameMaker pricing model would have been to have during the GameMaker Studio 1 days. But better late than never, I guess. So thank you to Yo-Yo Games for finally allowing us to use the engine to its fullest potential. Knowing I can now learn to build apps and games for different platforms other than PC without the need to, shell out hundreds of dollars is a godsend. And it opens up so many new possibilities with Dev Diary and honestly the future of this channel. So yeah, you could say I'm pretty jazzed about this new development, and I simply can't wait to explore it further. And hey, if you're watching this and you've been curious about GameMaker, but were too afraid to commit before you've even exported your first project, well, now is as good as ever to try it for yourself. Yeah, because as I've tried to illustrate since the beginning of this journey, if I can do it, so can you. Anyway, cheese aside, that's still just my opinion, and I'd love to know what you think of the changes to GameMaker's pricing model and if it has any effect on you personally. And if you would like to play some games that have been previously featured on the channel or want early access to the weekly videos, subscribe to my Patreon. With that said, brings us to the end of today's Dev Diary, so thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.